Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Meredith Hall to discuss her new novel, Beneficence. Amazing novel. Meredith Hall's memoir, Without a Map, was instantly recognized as a classic of the genre and became a New York Times bestseller. It was named Best Book of the Year by Kirkus and BookSense and was an Elle magazine reader's pick of the year. Meredith was a recipient of the 2004 Gift of Freedom Award from A Room of Her Own Foundation. Her work has appeared in 5 Points, the Gettysburg Review, the Kenyon Review, the Southern Review, the New York Times, and many other publications. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of Beneficence from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Meredith to the virtual screen stage. How are you?
Hello.
So nice to see you. Congratulations and happy book birthday.
Thank you very much.
Oh my God. You know, you read these marvelous quotes. I mean, I'm blown away by all of these people. Richard Ford, Danny Shapiro, Geraldine Brooks, Joyce Maynard, Stuart Onan. Oh my gosh, congratulations. I mean,
Thank you.
Wait, Richard Russo says, if the word luminous didn't already exist, you'd have to invent it to describe Meredith Hall's radiant new novel. And I agree with him. That's truly the word.
Thank you, Christina. The support of all of these people has just been really extraordinary. Thank you very much.
So why don't we just jump right in? Can you tell me what drew you to this particular story?
I had written a memoir and knew that I wanted to make the shift to fiction. I looked around for a story for a number of years. It took me a very long time to find my way to this story. And I slowly came to understand that what I was hoping to find was a story in which there was a moral ambiguity, that things became complicated. And I wanted, as a writer, to be challenged by those complications. And I heard a snippet of conversation one day with a neighbor in my town in Maine. And he told me a small story which involved a father. This was a true story, of course. And the father was faced with great difficulty, and he made very selfish and self-serving decisions. And I became very interested. I knew right away I had my story. I wanted to understand, how does this man go to bed at night and think about his life and these decisions and justify them? What is that? What are the justifications? So I came up with this story and moved into it. And I imagined a bad guy, actually. I thought I was going to write a bad guy. I was estranged from my father throughout my life. And I actually thought, I recognize my father in this. I'm going to write my father into this character. So that's where I started. And in fact, immediately after starting to write this book, I had not initially envisioned that there would be several voices. And this man, Tup, speaks, but also his wife speaks, and his daughter, Dodie, speaks. And when Doris, his wife, starts speaking, I understood right from the beginning that this was a man that she liked very profoundly and loved and respected and trusted. And this was not going to be a bad guy. That's not what the story was going to be about.
So interesting. So you started with Tup.
Yes.
Okay. So you wrote the book in 3 voices, and you structured it with 4 sections that are told over more than 2 decades.
Yes.
What was the process of making those decisions?
Well, as I said, I did not expect that there would be three voices. There are three children in this family. Sunny is the oldest, Dodie is the middle child, a girl, and Beston, a little boy. And I realized that I wanted somebody beside, I wanted more information than Tup was going to be able to give us. And so I thought, well, I'll let his wife speak. And then after his wife started speaking, I realized that I wanted at least one of the children to speak. And I decided that it would be Dodie. And that actually, I'm glad she sort of appeared to me and said she wanted this voice. And it was really a stroke of luck for me as a writer. She threw herself onto the page with so much confidence and showed herself to be a very remarkable person. We do watch her from the time she's about 10 years old until she's a married woman with a child of her own. And she is absolutely worth that place on the page as far as I'm concerned. As a writer, it was very gratifying. And so I had these three voices, the father, the mother, and this one child. And I realized that I would be moving through time, and I made the decision to be very clear about that. I wanted to write this book chronologically and be very clear with the reader. We are in the fall of 1959. Now we are in the spring of 1962. I wanted the reader, and each of those voices are in a pattern. We hear Doris, Dodie, Tup, over and over and over again. And it's actually very clear on the page where you are in time. And I felt a lot of, it gave me a chance to allow these people to roam around inside their stories and not let the reader get lost.
I love hearing writers talk about how characters speak to them, how they come to life, how they develop. It's just so fascinating. So what about reading to us a little bit so we can start getting a taste of the novel? Would you read to us?
Okay, I would love to do that.
Great.
So this is in Tup's voice. This family is very, very close. They live on a dairy farm in Maine. It's a very successful farm. It's been in Tup's family for 5 generations, as many of the farms in Maine are. It's a very, very beautiful place. This family knows that they live in a very beautiful and generous place. They have a profound sense of connection, not only to each other, but also to the land that is so generous with them. And they work hard. The book focuses on their daily work, and that work is vital to their well-being, but they do their work well, and they live a very comfortable life. Their habit every evening is to, after supper, they move to the front room in the cold weather, out to the porch, the screened porch in the warmer weather. And so this takes place as they transition into the front room one evening. Early in the fall, on a cool night with the wind coming from the northeast, we moved our evening time from the porch back to the front room. Beston took out the dominoes from their old wooden box and spread them on the table. The children don't know how to play the game and don't care to know. They spread the ebony pieces face up and made a long train across the table by number, dots matching dots. And then Sunny drifted to his book on the sofa. Sunny is the oldest child. The room glowed yellow and warm. Beston and Dodie started to clack the dominoes one against the other until I asked them to stop. Dodie sat next to Sunny and asked him what he was reading. Robin Hood, he said, it's really good. He sat deep in the cushions, leaning on the arm of the sofa. Will you read to us, his sister asked. He hadn't for a long time. Sunny raised his eyes to her and nodded. He moved over so Beston could fit on the other side of him and moved back to the first pages. And he's reading, King Richard I, Richard Coeur de Lion, came to the throne in 1189, he read, and very soon left his throne empty when he set off on the crusade to free Jerusalem from the Saracens. Beston and Dodie and Sunny leaned into each other, Sunny's voice clear and rhythmic, the quiet swish of the pages being turned like water behind his words. Doris and I put down our own books and listened. We felt the contentment of the early fall night soft among us in the room. Sonny held us all in his story, his voice fuller and deeper than in his daily talk. Prince John had ridden out to see the sheriff at work, and at this moment he joined the little group round the glowing embers of the cottage. This is fleeting, I thought. What we do is build a base for them, a good base for their start. I suddenly regretted whatever sharp words I may have spoken that day in the course of all the work that needed to be done. I couldn't remember if I had turned in impatience on any one of my children or my wife as they made their day. I regretted that I could not recall what I might have said. How could I tell them I was sorry if I could not say what I had done? I sat quietly, uneasy, my children and my wife happy for the moment, I knew, but I felt that I may somehow have strained the day and could not say when or how. You are a very good father, Doris often says to me, and I am, I know that, but I remember the woundings of a child's feelings and suddenly felt a deep sadness that I must sometimes be the cause of hurt in my own children. All guests will be welcome and no close watch kept as to who they are, Sonny read. The younger children were unembarrassed about lying across their older brother's legs, their heads on his shoulders. I suddenly rose from my chair, moving too quickly, so the children all looked up, startled. I turned and sat on the sofa next to Dodie, my arm across the shoulders of all three, an embrace. Sonny had stopped reading, and the room was quiet. I felt foolish and helpless against something I felt pressing at us all. Sonny looked across the room to his mother and over his sister's head to me. Have courage, my friends, cried Will Scarlett, he read, his voice still clear and steady. I laid my head on the back of the couch, my eyes closed, my arms enfolding my children, and I listened. My farm lay with all its promise within our fence line. The creek moved at its will through the fields, into the pond and out again on its way. The hill and the far back rose to the edge of the woods, the little graveyard holding all the centers who ever worked this land, who ever sat in this room on quiet evenings. I stopped trying to remember my trespasses. This is all that counts, I thought, right here. This represents my love and the way I give it. Beston fell asleep. Sonny yawned, and we all stood. I picked up my sleeping child. Doris followed us out, switching off the lamps when she heard our feet start on the stairs. The land is restless at night, even the tamed land of a farm. Doris and I lay side by side listening, wakened by the madwoman's shriek of a rabbit being killed, a fox or a bobcat or a farmer's dog playing wild. Later, a barred owl in all its rhythm, and another's response from the woods across the road. What happened to you tonight? Doris whispered in the dark. I don't know, I said. I reached for her warmth and pulled her to me, my face close to hers. I don't want to ever have regrets. I waited for her response, but she stayed quiet. I go cold sometimes, thinking that I will someday find that all the good I thought I was doing will appear to be all wrong, that I'll be blamed. The night waited, that I will be rightly blamed. Doris touched my lips with her fingers and allowed herself to settle against me. I am afraid that I won't be recognized, I said, that my children will blame me for whatever might happen, that they'll believe I failed to try. Every parent worries about that, my wife said. Your children know that you are a very good father. They know that you are a very good husband. I'll remind them when they are grown that their father was a very good man. Thank you, Doris. I rolled to my back and took her hand. I'll remind them the same about you. We've gotten this far, okay? If anyone walked in the fields that night, they would see that the moon shadows of the fence posts stretched in long parallel lines across the pasture. The upper limbs of the hemlock and tamarack and pines swayed. This generation of centers slept, unable to know whatever might come to us. I woke in the morning at ease again, trusting that my effort would be the measure of judgment. Marion, who is a childhood friend of theirs, arrived after breakfast, and Dodie and her friend cleaned out the hen house as if it were play. Best and Sonny and I had wood to get in from beyond the ledges across the road. Doris called us all to our noon dinner, and the kitchen filled with talk and laughter. Thank you.
So what does it feel like to read your own words?
That's a wonderful, I've never been asked that question, Christina. That's a wonderful question. It is a very strange experience. I have to say it is gratifying. It's, I read this work as if another person wrote it. I truly do not recognize it as I read it.
I have heard that from so many writers.
Yes, it's an unconscious act. I write from someplace so interior. I write very privately. Nobody sees my work for the entire piece. I write an entire book without another person seeing any of it, which I think I admire writers. I see in the acknowledgments page at the end of books, the long list of readers who have helped that writer. And I envy them, but I don't work that way. I work in complete solitude. And I make this work, and at the end, I read it through. It is what it is, and I send it to my agent. So it is a deeply interior. It's a very mysterious process. I would say that.
Is it like a possession of sorts? I mean, do you feel that? I've read Elizabeth Gilbert. You know, her Big Magic. I don't know if you've read it. Talks so much about the muses. You know, and how you actually court them.
No, honestly, that's not the experience I have. I have an odd habit when I write of listening to Gregorian chants. And I listen for hours, a long, long loop of Gregorian chants. It's very beautiful music. It's there are no words I understand. They're in Latin or Italian. I don't understand them. And but it's a very centering music for me. And I find I've been writing to this music for so long that when I click that button, it's as if a switch in my brain just goes on and I disappear. I'm gone. I'm in another world. I can't write when other people are around. I can't write when my family is around. It's a very, very, excuse me, it's a selfish act in many ways. I think it's it's delicious. It's almost an addiction. It almost feels like a drug addiction. I want to be in that place that is so far away and so interior and so completely mine. I'll also say that writing this particular book, I fell in love with these people so entirely that I was very anxious to be with them. They became very real to me, their joys and their love and this beautiful place. This place became my home. And I wanted to be there very much. Their griefs, when this tragedy strikes this family, their griefs became my griefs, and they were very, very difficult months of writing. I had a very difficult time separating out the griefs that they were experiencing and my own sort of daytime life that I live. I would scold myself periodically, saying, you know, you're just a fool. You can rewrite this. They don't have to experience this thing that is breaking you and breaking them. But it was a story that needed to be told.
I'm fascinated to hear that you write with the Gregorian chants in the background, because there is a quality in this book that is like a sense of worship. It's really interesting that it comes across to the reader. It definitely came across to me. And now that connection is so interesting to me.
I think it affects the pacing of my language too.
It's like, you know, a tenderness,
yes,
an interiority,
yes,
that almost like a prayer.
Yes.
So very interesting, very interesting.
You know, thank you for those comments.
Well, it's absolutely true. So so did you grow up on a Maine farm? Because, you know, the Center's farm is so fully imagined. Was that, where does that come from?
I did not grow up on a Maine farm. I grew up in a small New Hampshire town just over the border from Maine, and have lived my life from my very early 20s in Maine, in small towns. When I was a kid, my sister and I kept 4-H sheep, and she had a horse, and we were around farm people. It was a small town that still had farms around. And certainly when I moved to Maine, I've lived in small towns all the time, and farming is just part of Maine. Unfortunately, they are facing terrible difficulties. There's a resurgence among young people, a sort of second wave of back to the land living that's very exciting. But the old farms have really struggled. But I somehow, I think anybody in those towns was aware of the farm life. I think more than that, though, this is a life that I wish that I had lived. This is a place that I wish had been mine, and a life I wish had been mine. And so it was a delicious inventing of a place that
you're so lucky that you can bring that, that you can live that through what you write.
Yeah, yes, I do. I miss it. I'm homesick for it.
So without giving too much away, because we want people to buy the book, a terrible tragedy comes to the family, and we watch them struggle through their grief. But you also write about the beneficence of the title. So how do these characters find their way back to that sense of their world? And I am personally very curious about how you chose the title.
I think, it takes a very long time for this family to find their way out of the sorrow, the grief that they're experiencing, and the terrible, overwhelming sense of guilt and self-reproach that they feel. They each seem to feel that the other members of the family hold them responsible. And I don't think that that's true. I think they each have to come to an understanding that the other family members are not blaming them, and that the blame is entirely their own. This process takes a number of years. I think that there is a critical moment. Dodie eventually marries Young, a very, very wonderful young man who was a close friend of the children when this tragedy strikes. He was present. He's carried this event himself. And they end up years later in high school, actually, finding their way to each other again, and eventually they marry. And it is actually this character, Danielle, who does not play a large role in the story, but it's Danielle who actually, in great distress, approaches these people and he says, what are you doing? Call this what it is. This is grief. This is a tragedy that hit this family, and what you are feeling is grief because of that. And I think that that's a turning point for the family. I think he ruptures something that has encapsulated each of them and held them separate from each other. And once that happens, it's not an immediate fix, but slowly they find their way back to each other. And I think they're able to do that because the kind of love and respect and pleasure in each other that they shared hasn't diminished. It has been there all that time. And so they come back into a much healthier place. It's very clear by the end that the costs of that loss and all those experiences over those years, those costs are there between them. They can't be erased. They never return. They know they will never return to the place that this family shared before this event. That's just part of their new world. The title came in a surprising way. My wonderful editor at Godine Publishing, Josh Bodwell, we were talking about titles, and I had, in my own mind, referred to it as the center place, which is a common way to refer to farms in Maine, just by the family name, the center place. And Josh suggested that Beneficence would be a good title, and I felt as if it was a word foreign to me. It didn't really register. And as I went back through the book, doing some very last few copy edits, I suddenly came across the word beneficence in my language. I wrote the word beneficence on the page, and I was shocked by that. And I did a word search and was stunned to find out that I actually used the word beneficence in this book 4 times. And I thought, well, I guess this is really about beneficence, that state of goodness. I believe that each of us lives in beneficence. I believe that we carry beneficence and that we need and seek beneficence. And it was a state that they knew and they lost, and they made their way back to it.
Beautiful. Thank you. So both of the parents, Doris and Tup, behave far outside anything they ever imagined of themselves. Mm-hmm. They both fail each other and their children. Tup betrays and abandons people outside his family, yet you write these people with love and compassion. Do you forgive them? Should we?
This is a great question. I do forgive them. I hope that readers find in these people a humanity that we all share. They are flawed characters. Most of us, I hope that's true, don't face this particular kind of tragedy. It's an extreme tragedy, one that, we dread and turn away from. But they are hit by this terrible thing. And that loss and grief causes them to move off into themselves and into living lives and being people that they certainly never imagined, and the reader up to that point would not imagine. And they each fail their children and each other very, very badly. They make terrible decisions. Tup makes decisions. Doris, I think, really does not make decisions so much as move in a kind of emotional trance. And she's unable to haul herself back to her responsibilities to her family. Tup actually he is so distressed at Doris's absence, at her emotional absence, that finally he makes some terrible decisions and causes great harm. I have been asked, is it true? Tup tells us repeatedly, he protests a lot in this book as he struggles with these decisions, but I am a good man. You heard it even in that very early passage when nothing has happened yet. Mm-hmm. And he's questioning this. Am I a good man? Mm-hmm. How will I be judged? Mm-hmm. And that continues right to the end. But I am a good man, he tells us. He tells himself. It's as if he's arguing with himself. And so I think it leaves the reader, there is that moral ambiguity. It leaves the reader to decide whether these actions are failures that any of us might commit, or if he really is a particularly bad person and did bad things. I personally don't think that that's true, but I think that readers will bring their own stories to this, and I recognize that as I wrote it.
Very interesting. So hard work inside the house and on the farm binds these people to the home, the land. Why did you choose to focus your attention on that work that they do?
That's great. I think our daily work is important. I like daily work. I rely on it. And on a farm, it's not just important, it's vital. It is vital to their survival. And the work that they do is not, I suppose a lot of readers will say that's not for me, but it's work they love. Doris did not grow up on a farm. She grew up in a small town in Maine. Her father was a shopkeeper, and she always imagined that she would take over and run the shop, and then meets Tup. And Tup's father, in fact, has raised his children alone for the last number of years and does not love the farm. It's been let go. He does not love that work. He does not find that work satisfying. But he also was doing it without a partner. When Tup marries Doris and brings her to this rundown farm, it started as a beautiful farm generations before, and they restore it to that beauty and that sufficiency. And that work is so satisfying to them. It's such hard work. It's also very regular work. There are rhythms and patterns, and I believe those rhythms are very, very good for us. And the rhythms and patterns are about the land, about the animals, certainly about the cows, but they are also about husbanding the land. And I think that the land has its own rhythms, and the people move to those rhythms. They work within those rhythms. And I'm interested in the work. The details of the work interest me, but mostly I was interested in the ways in which that steady rhythmic work binds the family and binds the family to the land.
Well, you really bring us there, because there really is like that sense of place and all of the details involved in that work. And you you make us feel that we are living it. It's really wonderful. So your first book was a memoir. Why did you move to fiction, and what was the transition like for you?
I wrote my memoir when I was older. It is about events that happened to me starting when I was 16 years old. And I didn't write this book. It was my first book, and I didn't write it until several decades later. I think that was a grace in my life. I had time to actually sort of own that story and be able to share it in ways that I would not have been able to. But I knew only enough about writing and publishing. I taught writing for many years in the undergraduate and then the MFA program at the University of New Hampshire. And I knew just enough about publishing to know that most books don't get published. So I thought that I was writing in obscurity, and I wrote a deeply intimate book. These stories had been silenced. I got pregnant when I was 16 in the mid-60s, 1965. This is a forbidden moment in a girl's life back then. And I was expelled from school. I could not return to public school. I was expelled by my mother from my house. I was expelled from my community and my friends. It was a very, very costly time. My father and his new wife took me in, but as soon as the baby was born and that was over, then I was also expelled from their house. So I lost everybody. I lost all of it. And so it was a big story, but I had somehow, as young women do, I agreed to silence. And I eventually, nobody knew. My husband knew when I married, but it was never ever talked about in our family. It was an event that didn't happen. The child was given into adoption, and nobody spoke a word about it. And so finally, years later, decades later, I decided that I was going to break that taboo and tell these stories. When I did, thinking nobody would read it, it was very intimate. That book did get published, and it did do very well, and a lot of people read it. And that brought me out into the world talking about the book, but also about my life. And eventually I hit a point. And I think for me, as a woman, these were very important stories to tell. And I was happy to be with people and talking about these events and their emotional cost. But eventually I decided that I had had enough and I needed to reclaim my privacy. And fiction offered the avenue to that. And so eventually I wrote this book. I do think, in an odd way, this book exposes truths about me and who I am and how I live in the world and how I see the world. I actually think this fiction is more intimate in many ways than my memoir was. I do feel more exposed. I feel more known in this novel than I did even with that memoir, which has been, it's a complete surprise to me. I would not have predicted that.
That is so fascinating. Oh my gosh, just really, really incredible to think about. So you have touched upon this already, but what are your writing habits?
My writing habits are, as I said, they're very private, they're very interior. I have a very wonderful small room in my house. There's nothing notable about the room, but the only thing that happens in that room is that I write. I don't have, I can't Google in there. I'm not on Safari. I I do nothing but my creative work in that room, nothing else. Papers aren't filed in that room that have nothing to do with my writing. This is my place to write.
And is it stark, or do you have any images, or?
I have lots of books and a secondary desk that's behind me that I can spread out papers if I wanted to sort things through, and a wall to wall. It's a small room, but a window that is side to side and to the ceiling. I have lots of light looking out on nothing in particular, a neighborhood and my gardens, which I love and work hard in. So it's just my place. It's my creative place. The Gregorian chants go on, and I write. I think the difference, another difference about my writing is that having taught writing for many decades, I always taught that we sit down and we start. You just start. You pick up your pen or you open your computer and you start, and you write a draft, and you write some more on the draft and some more on the draft. And then eventually, after you have enough pages, you think it through and you know this needs to go and this needs to go and this stays and maybe it needs to be moved there. And you build your work in that way. And I don't write the way I taught for all those years. I write.
Of course not. Of course not.
I write very slowly in that whatever that profound internal space is. I write word and phrase as I make sentences, and then sentences move to sentences. And I will very occasionally stop and go back and read back a couple paragraphs, catch up with where I am, and start again. When I complete the work at the end of the day, I leave either mid-sentence or mid-paragraph. I don't want to come back the next morning and have to imagine where I am. I know exactly where I am. And I start there and I return to that very quiet, slow process of word by word and paragraph by paragraph. And when I'm done with that chapter, it's done. That's it. I never go back to it. I don't reread it from the beginning. I have not at that point read that entire chapter through, only back a few paragraphs and forward, back a few paragraphs and forward. And then I write the entire book that way. And when I think I'm done, I pull it together and make it one document and read it and see if it's a book.
Longhand, computer, or typewriter?
No, I use a word processor, and I honestly am very grateful for it. I greatly admire writers who work on paper. I do believe that it's a very different process. It would feel very chaotic to me. I wouldn't know where anything was. I would be crossing things off. I get lost in all that paper, and it would be very, very troubling to me. I think part of it is because I think that involves a kind of intellectual process of assessing, and I don't do that. It's somehow that's not part of my process. I love my word processor. It suits my writing habit very well. It lets me go back those 2 or 3 paragraphs and slide forward again. Everything else behind that is out of sight. It's gone. It's off the screen, and I don't see it. I don't have, 300 pieces of paper at my feet on the floor. So it suits me very well.
How many hours a day do you spend writing?
I have erratic writing habits because I have a lot of interests in life, and I have a family that children and grandchildren, and a great number of people with children and grandchildren that are very important to me. And I have interests. I live a life between Maine and now Berkeley, California. I have 2 sons on the West Coast, and one in Austin. And so it's a busy life. And I move through that, and then finally something opens, and then I can enter that writing. And I'll write very intensively for many, many, many months, or a year and a half. It also seems to take me a while to find my story and figure out where I am. But this is my first novel. I'm at the beginning of this. We'll see how this all goes.
I think.
But when I write for months and months on end, very intensively, and nothing else happens.
So I think there will be another one. But may I ask, what are you working on now, or what comes next, if you would like to share with us?
Well, if people like Beneficence, I don't want to be making any promises, but I have always wondered why writers return to previous work. I've never really understood it. I don't tend to read books in series. And I am finding, maybe with a little embarrassment, that I don't feel done with some of these characters. Beston is the youngest child in this family. He's a very little boy when the book starts, but I didn't give him a voice. He doesn't tell us any of his own thoughts and stories. And he's also by nature just a very quiet boy and doesn't share his life with others anyway. And I'm interested in him. We leave him in Boston, working in Boston. He's a musician. He interests me. And I also am very interested. There's a young girl, Grace, who has suffered her own abandonments. And I'm very interested in her. So I am circling and circling what these stories look like.
How do you live with your characters?
In love.
Are they with you like all the time, as if
Yes.
they were?
Yes.
When
This
you're
book,
living your life, do you think about them? Do you
absolutely.
talk to them?
Yes. I don't know if I talk to them. I wouldn't say that.
Or do they talk to you?
I maybe in their ways. This book went to my agent last year. It was published in October of 2020, this past fall, and I still can't shake it. I think that I need to continue to make my way out beyond this book. I cannot shake this place and these characters. They are with me in such significant, in really profound ways. When I was writing the book, I live alone, and that's a good thing because they became as real to me as any people in my days. And it's hard to leave that. How do you walk away from that kind of intimate relationship? So it's hard. I think that they must. I don't know. I'll find out. This is the first time I've done this. I'll find out. Will they be with me in 10 years? I know that I miss them. I miss them.
Again, I find that just fascinating, how writers live with their characters.
Mm-hmm.
Just so interesting. So thank you so much. I want to go to some audience questions.
Thank you, Christina.
Here's one from Sarah, who would like to know, what were the unique challenges of moving from memoir to fiction? I think you addressed that a little bit, but do you find one genre more difficult, inventing characters versus writing the painful parts of real life?
I'm not sure that I have a judgment of which is more difficult or more challenging. They certainly are very, very different, but any student who has worked with me knows that what I teach is narrative fiction or narrative nonfiction. And for me, it's all telling stories, and the stories are true or the stories arise from my imagination. And the techniques of writing narration are all the same, no matter whether it was about something that happened to me when I was 20, or if it is something that I'm making up. I will say that the process of imagining is extraordinary. I love it. I had no idea what a lively and busy imagination I have. It's absolutely wonderful to sit down and know that is my universe. It's mine. And I don't have to hold to anything. Nothing constrains me. And it's really an extraordinary experience, very freeing. I sometimes imagine I am an essayist. I think the essay is actually the most elegant genre. I think it's an absolutely beautiful form, and very demanding, very difficult. And I do miss writing essays. I don't know if I'll ever write a nonfiction book again, but I do have a number of essays that I would like to write. But as I think about those, I'm very happy to spring back off into the fiction.
Do you do a lot of research when preparing to write?
On In this book, I did very little research. I don't know, I really can't account for the fact that this farm came to me as such a real place. I've had many of my farm neighbors in Maine commend me and say, you got it, you really did get it. But I think that is pure imagination and longing. I wanted to live on that farm. I wanted that life. I did have to research certain things. There were details about, the daily habits in the household. I just knew them. I just understood them. I grew up in a very small town, and New England small towns during my childhood had not yet moved into the 60s or the 70s or the 80s. That had not happened. These towns were living in another time, and it's a very innocent time. And those habits, noon dinner, these habits were still there for families and communities. So what happened inside the house was all very familiar to me. There were things in the barn I didn't know. How old are calves when you castrate them, and exactly when do you put manure on your fields? What parts Beston, the young boy, takes over maintaining the engines. All the mechanical things, and I needed to learn a little bit about that.
There's a scene where the dad takes them fishing in the middle of the night.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes. I considered reading that tonight.
Maybe you still can. No.
I don't know how
like to. We still have a little time, but you don't have to. I mean, but that really came to life for me.
Yes.
The lights, the way it looked, the feeling of, being woken up in the middle of the night as a kid and dragged out, and the cold water, like all of it.
Yeah, you have a wonderful memory for that scene. That's great, Christina. So that's actually something that I did when I was a young person, and I have, as you can see, wonderful memories of it.
Yeah, no, I felt it completely. Okay, let's see. What are you reading now, and are there any inspirations or influences for you?
I'm doing a lot of reading right now of books. Actually, I have many conversation partners for events coming up, and I'm reading the work of those writers, Larry Watson and Joyce Maynard and Gillian Medoff. And so I've dug into that work, and it's really fun. This is, it's wonderful to come across writers that you're not, you know their work, but you have never read their work. And I really am having fun with it. I think that there have been influences for me. I admire Toni Morrison's work very much. I'm very interested in the structure of her novels. She seems to have an acute intuitive sense of how she structures time in her novels, and she manages to sneak up on us in ways that I haven't quite figured out yet. Kent Harif is a writer I admire very much. He wrote Plain Song. It's just a magnificent book. Marilyn Robinson I admire, and yes, yes, I admire her work very much. And some older writers, William Faulkner has, excuse me, William Faulkner has, he caught me a long time ago. I feel a sense of awe for his writing. He is an extraordinary writer. And he's a writer that I study because I admire so much. He makes moves on the page through time that are very difficult for us to follow. He's very cagey. We don't know how we got from there to here. And I admire it a lot.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you. So I think we have answered all of our questions. My dog is here trying to get my attention. So let me just send her home. Go home. Go home. Sorry.
I love that.
She knows it's dinner time. So would you like to, let me see, there's someone else's. Oh, Sarah says the dog has a question.
Yes, right.
She probably does. When are you going to feed me, Mama? So would you like to end with a little reading?
Would you like me to do that? It will be about the length of the one that I did earlier. Is that okay? Will that work?
Yes.
Okay. So this is in Dodie's voice. So this is the child, this girl child. She is probably about 10 or 11 here. I'd have to figure that out, but she's about 10 or 11 years old here. Every spring, Daddy brings us all the way down to the mouth of our creek, where it opens to the sea at Carry Cove. This is a creek that runs through their farm, and then it's called Center Creek after their family, and it runs many miles to the ocean. They don't live very close to the ocean. We go down at night when the moon is full, but it's very cloudy, so everything looks like it's glowing from inside, trees and fences and even barns, silver and lit up by a light you can't see. This is the time to dip for smelt, which we love to get and love to eat. Daddy doesn't tell us ahead of time, and then he's by our beds in the middle of the night whispering, "Want to get some smelt?" And we know we have about 5 minutes to wake up enough to get into our chore clothes and our boots and our hats and mittens because it's very cold on smelt night, and climb into the warm truck. This year it was the end of March when Daddy believed the time was right. He put the radio up high in the truck and sang "Till the End of Time" as if he was the happiest man in the world. He reached over and squeezed the funny spot above Sonny's knee so hard it made Sonny laugh out loud. And then Daddy told him, wake up, we have smelt waiting for us." And he held Sonny's hand. Sonny has grown big for that, but still, whenever Daddy is in the truck with one of us, even Sonny, he holds our hand. We drove on the dark roads all the way to Chase Mills and turned down a tote road Daddy's grandfather showed him a long time ago, and we parked the truck. The wide cove spread silent beyond us. We carried the buckets and dip nets on the path through the black woods, and then we could hear our creek all the way down there near the ocean, roaring down the hillside and running out to the bay, while all the smelt tried to run upstream 5 miles to lay their eggs. Daddy said we were there to put them in our buckets and give them a lift. By now we were awake and cold before we even got into the water. Daddy put the big metal buckets on the rocks along the stream and told Sonny to take the net and move into the tumbling current. Daddy clicked on the flashlight, and there they were, pushing desperately upstream. He chose the night just right. So many little silverfish packed side to side, they made their own river of light in the stream. Sonny braced himself against the hard run of water and swept the net into the current, and it was full in a flash. Daddy held the bucket out over the creek to receive the shimmering fish. And again, and then Sonny and my father had filled the first bucket, and it was my turn. Always in order with everything, Sonny, Dodie, Beston, and I waded out to just below the tops of my boots. I could feel the fish slither and thump against my shins, wanting so much to go home and make their babies. It's not something you have to think about, Dodie, my father always says. Everything is part of the good world, a perfect system, and us eating these fish is part of that order. You can't be making every little fish something you need to save. My father is right. It felt like the most natural thing in the world to be standing in the icy water with fish bumping against me, trying to get past, and me reaching in among them and hauling them up, the water dripping in the silver light, the fish slapping silver, the trees glowing silver, my father and my brothers dark shadows with silver in their hair, their hands silver reaching to help me, the fish sliding into my bucket so I could place the net again. Beston's turn, then Daddy's, and then we each carried our bucket along the rocky path up to the truck, Daddy helping Beston, but letting him feel that he was doing it himself. And we didn't speak along that path or at the truck or on the long ride home. Daddy had the radio low now and the heater high, and we settled in close to each other for warmth and because we were happy and sleepy and satisfied. Daddy held Beston's hand, letting go to shift, and drove slowly so we could watch the woods and the farms in all their dark quiet and peace. Mom was up when we got home, nodding and smiling as we lugged our buckets to the sink. No one talked. We washed our hands in warm water and threw our clothes in the basket in the shed, and Sonny and Beston went to their room and I went to mine, climbing back into our cold beds that were soon warm. No one would wake us for school in the morning. The sun was up and the kitchen was warm and the fish were slit and gutted and in the chest freezer when we came down. Why don't the fish come to our farm? I asked my father once. Why do we have to go so far to find them? He said, everything we will ever need or want is close enough, Dodie. Are you telling me you don't like my singing in the truck? On cloudy full moon nights, I will remember all my life that soft silver light and the four of us standing in our creek, so far from home, but center creek still, no matter what, the fish rushing into our net and my welcoming mother waiting for us at home.
Bravo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Christina,
Thank you.
this has been such a pleasure.
Oh,
It's been my honor to sit with you. Your questions are wonderful. Your insights and comments are great. So thank you very much.
For us as well. Thank you. We're thrilled that you were able to join us. Just want to thank you for supporting independent bookstores like ours. Remind everyone watching that if you haven't ordered the book already, you can press the green button and we'll ship it right out to you. Or you can come by one of our stores if you're in Miami and get it there as well. And I just, congratulations. What an accomplishment.
Thank you.
Enjoy the journey. Enjoy the
very gratifying. Yes.
Good. And hopefully we'll see you in person sometime
Wonderful,
soon.
Christina. Thank you. That would be a pleasure.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.